The federal Paycheck protection program is back up and running this week, giving struggling small businesses a second shot at survival. However, as lenders begin dispersing these funds, many shuttered minority-owned businesses are being left to drown in a growing pile of expenses. According to the Center for Responsible Lending, over 90% of Black, Latino, or Pacific Islander-owned businesses and 75% of Asian-owned businesses stand close to no chance of receiving a PPP loan through a mainstream bank. With me now is Ashley Harrington. She's the Director of Federal Advocacy and Senior Counsel for the Center for Responsible Lending. Thanks so much for being with us, Ashley. We've talked a lot on this show about the fact that minority-owned businesses are often cut out from these bigger banks. At the same time, there's $60 billion set aside for community banks that serve minority businesses. Why is that money not enough?
Thanks so much for having me. You're right. Small businesses of color are very, very important to this economy and to their communities. And you're right. There was $60 billion in the most recent PPP package that unfortunately most of it will not get to communities of color. And that's because the best way to get funding to businesses of color, to small businesses of color and communities of color, is through minority depository institutions called MDIs and community development financial institutions, CDFIs. These institutions are the ones that have the best track record of reaching communities of color, reaching low LMI communities, low and moderate income communities, than any other type of banks. And because of the way the funding is set up, they do not get their own reserve out of that $60 billion. So we called for $10 billion to be specifically allocated for the CDFIs and MDIs. Without that reserve, it is highly likely that they will still not get their fair share of the funding, and then that funding will then not get to businesses of color.
Center for Responsible Lending is calling for money to be allocated for small businesses that have just one employee. Why is that so important?
Well, not just for one employee. We're calling for funding to get to businesses that are smaller. Most small businesses of color are small businesses, sole proprietorships, or businesses with 10 or less employees, right? These are the businesses we're talking about. These are businesses that need loans of $50,000, $30,000, $20,000 to stay in business. So these are actual small business, what we typically think of when we're thinking about a small business, right? And so we need a program that really targets relief at businesses of that size, because that ensures that funding will get to them. The current structure of the PPP program sets it up so that the origination fee that's paid to banks is based on the amount of the loan. So when you're a small business with a small payroll or a sole proprietorship or just a one-owner business, you have a smaller payroll, so you need a smaller loan. Therefore, the origination fee that's going to banks is going to be that much smaller.
Well, part of the challenge is that fee, but part of the challenge is also the requirements that are set up and baked into the PPP program currently, requiring that 75% of funds go toward employee salaries and 25% toward rent and utilities. But you have some businesses with high rents that are still closed because of these provisions. Do they need to be rethought?
Absolutely, right? So we're thinking about businesses that right now the PPP is structured so that it's only going to cover 2 months of payroll expenses, and you have to be in business now or be able to reopen. Many businesses right now, because the country was already struggling before the CARES Act was implemented, or because we're still on stay-at-home orders, these businesses can't readily reopen, right? And so their loans may not even be forgivable if they take them out because they're not going to meet the requirements like you mentioned. So we need to think about what actually is an eligible expense to be forgiven and how we're ensuring that businesses that have already had to close or can't reopen right now will have the opportunity to do so in the future. And a lot of these businesses are the very, very small businesses.
All right, Ashley, thanks so much.
Thank you.